The Day the Sun Went Out. Chapter 1, Noon That Never Ended. At first, it looked like someone had lowered a dimmer switch. Edda Jonstatier was standing in the turbine hall at Helishaithi, earplugs in, watching the steady needle of the gauge because that was what you did when everything was working. The hall throbbed with a familiar, honest sound, water made into steam, steam made into motion, motion made into electricity. Heat turned into order. Through the high windows, the sky was an unbroken blue. It was early afternoon in late September when the light in Iceland already had the taste of winter. Then the blue drained out. It wasn't a cloud. It didn't roll in. It didn't have an edge. It was as if the world simply forgot to keep glowing. The windows went dark, not like sunset, but like someone had put black velvet against the glass. The hall lights flickered, and for a heartbeat the turbines sounded louder, their hum suddenly intimate, the only thing holding back a silence that wanted to swallow everything. Edda yanked one earplug out. "Jonas?" she shouted, though her voice came out flat in the sudden wrongness. Jonas, the shift manager, stood by the control console with his hands hovering over buttons as if he could physically catch the plant if it fell. His face was ghost pale in the emergency LEDs. "Grid frequency is wobbling," he said. "Load spike." On the monitor, the line that should have been calm as a heartbeat trembled. Outside, a car horn blared, long and frantic. Edda walked to the window. She pressed her palm to the glass. It was already cold. Somewhere, a coworker whispered, "Where did the sun go?" It was a childish sentence, the kind you laughed at in a science museum. It didn't belong inside a building that ran on equations and maintenance schedules. But there it was, true in her mouth when she tried it silently. Where did the sun go? Phone started vibrating. A chorus of alert tones, news pings, missed calls. Edda's screen lit up her hands, ARI calling. "Your son?" She answered too fast. "Ari?" Behind his voice she could hear yelling, a low roar like waves hitting the harbor wall. "Mama, it's dark. In the middle of school everyone is freaking out. The teachers are locking doors." "Stay inside," Edda said, the engineer part of her trying to turn fear into instructions. "Stay with your class. Don't go outside even if people run." "Why?" "Because people get hurt in crowds. Because the cold will come. Because I need you somewhere I can find you. Because it's safer," she said, and hated how thin it sounded. On the control room screens, Reykjavik's load demand climbed again and again, people turning on every light, every heater, every oven, as if brightness could be manufactured by sheer panic. "We're going to trip," Jonas said, "if we don't shed." Edda's brain snapped into the shape it knew, the shape of problems that could be solved. "We can isolate district heating," she said. "Prioritize hot water, not electric." The plant fed both, electricity to the grid, hot water to the pipes that warmed homes, schools, the hospital. In Iceland, you learned early that survival was a plumbing problem. Jonas stared at her, a man watching the edge of a cliff. The grid. "The grid will fall if everyone pulls on it at once," Edda said. "But if the pipes stay warm, people can shelter. Heat buys time." She watched his eyes shift, focus, the old training taking hold. "Okay," he said hoarsely. "Okay, you're right." Orders rolled out, valves adjusted, a few megawatts here, a few there. The plant's heart beat harder, and Edda could feel it through the concrete. Outside the world had gone blind, but inside the gauges still spoke. For 20 minutes, they kept the numbers in their lanes. Then the first tower down the line reported ice on its cables. Ice, in September, 20 minutes after noon. "That's impossible," someone said, and Edda hated the word. Impossible was what you said when you stopped thinking. The world did not care what you had labeled impossible. She pulled up a weather feed. The satellite image was nothing but black. The temperature graph plunged like a thrown stone. The sun hadn't just dimmed, it had gone, and without it, the sky was no longer a ceiling, it was a mouth. Jonas rubbed his face with both hands. "We should send everyone home," he said, and the idea made Edda's stomach twist. Home meant windows and thin walls. Home meant people alone with their fear and their empty freezers. "We should keep a skeleton crew," she said, "and we should open the visitor center." He blinked. "For tourists?" "For people," Edda said. "If the heating holds here, if we keep power stable, this is one of the warmest, safest buildings in 50 kilometers. Jonas looked at the dark windows as if he could see the future through them. "The company won't like." "The company can like it later," Edda said. Her phone buzzed again. "Text from Ari. They say parents can pick us up. Roads are chaos." Her chest tightened. She pictured her son in a hallway lit by emergency lights, his hair too long, his shoulders too thin inside his hoodie, trying to look older than he was. "I need to go," she told Jonas. "I'll be back." He caught her arm. His grip was stronger than she expected. "Don't go alone." Etta swallowed. She hated needing help, but she hated the idea of leaving the plant short-handed even more. "Raffen," she called, "can you drive?" Rovnin was a former Coast Guard tech who'd come to the plant because machines were simpler than people. He had a slow smile and a scar at the corner of his mouth that made him look like he'd learned how to survive by getting cut. "I can drive," he said, already grabbing his jacket. Outside, the parking lot was a smear of headlights in total dark. The air hit Etta like a slap, not crisp autumn, but something deeper, a cold that felt old, like the space between stars. The sky was wrong. Not clouded, not stormy, simply absent. Above them, the Milky Way stood up like a wall, bright enough to make shadows. Stars that normally lived in photographs now pressed down, close, and sharp. For a terrifying second, Etta wondered if the Earth had moved, if the sun hadn't disappeared at all, but they had fallen away from it like a dropped tool. "Look," Raffen said. On the southern horizon, where the sun should have been, there was nothing. No glow, not even the faintest gray. Etta forced herself into motion. She climbed into the passenger seat of Hafen's jeep. The engine turned over reluctantly. In the distance, Reykjavik was a bruise of dim light backup generators, emergency beacons, fading fast. The road down from the plateau was clogged with cars, their taillights red as wounds. People drove too fast or too slow. Some had stopped entirely, engines dead from cold or fear. "Window down," Raffen said. Etta cracked it. A man's voice carried from the car ahead. "It's the Russians," he was saying, as if saying it gave him a shape to shoot at. Another voice argued it was God. Another said it was a solar flare, which was a neat trick considering the sun was gone. They passed a bus on its side, hazard lights blinking weakly, surrounded by figures moving like insects around a fallen fruit. "We can't stop," Raffen said, reading Etta's face. "Not if you want your kid." Etta's nails bit into her palm. "I know." In her mind, she started making a list the way she did for equipment checks. Heat source, water, food, shelter, light, communication. Heat, Hedashaithi. Water, fill containers before pipes freeze. Food, whatever is in pantries, then ration. Shelter, together, not scattered. Light, electricity, candles, anything. Communication, radio, old tech. Survival, she realized, was going to be a series of small, boring decisions made correctly under ridiculous circumstances. They reached the school in a crawl. The building looked like it was floating in space, lit by a few lanterns. Parents clustered at the doors, shouting names. The air was full of breath like smoke. Etta pushed through. "Ari," she called, and heard her own voice crack. He appeared from the hallway, taller than she remembered from that morning. His eyes were huge in the flashlight glare. She grabbed him, held him too hard. He smelled like pencil shavings and fear. "Mama," he said into her shoulder, "is it going to come back?" Etta wanted to say yes. She wanted to be a mother and a miracle worker. Instead, she pulled back and looked at him, forcing calm into her face the way she forced stability into the grid. "I don't know," she said, "but I know where it's warm, and I know what to do next." Outside, the stars burned indifferent and close. Hlafen kept the jeep running as they drove back up toward the plant, headlights carving a tunnel through darkness. Behind them, Reykjavik's last scattered lights winked out one by one, like a city drowning. When Helishaithi came into view, it was a bright island on the plateau, a ship's lantern in an empty sea. Steam rose from its vents, ghost white and shining under the Milky Way. People were already walking toward it on foot, silhouettes hauling bags, pushing strollers, dragging suitcases that bounced uselessly over gravel. Their faces were turned toward the glow the way sunflowers turned toward light. Etta watched them and felt the first true weight of what had happened. The sun was gone. And everyone was going to come for the heat. Chapter 2: Heat and Teeth. By the second hour, the visitor center was no longer a visitor center. It became a waiting room for the end of the world. They opened every interior door to share warmth and shut every exterior door they could. Hoffman and 2 maintenance techs carried benches into the lobby and then carried more benches because people kept arriving and the floor was hard and the cold found every seam in clothing. Etta found a whiteboard and wrote 3 words in thick marker, warmth H. Water, order, order. Underneath, she added a 4th, smaller, QUIET. No one obeyed that one. "Phones are dead," a woman said, shoving her screen at Etta as if Etta had stolen the signal. "The network." "The cell towers need power," Etta said. "Text instead of calling. It uses less, and conserve your batteries." The woman stared at her blankly. A teenage boy in a puffer jacket laughed, a short, sharp sound that turned into a cough. "Conserve," he mocked, as if the word itself was offensive. Etta looked past them. People were gathering in clusters, building little circles of comfort with shoulders and gossip. Fear moved between them like static. Jonas found Edda at the edge of the turbine hall where the noise thinned enough for conversation. His hair was damp with sweat. "The grid's gone unstable," he said. "We can't keep exporting. We have to island." "Then island," Edda said. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. To island the plant meant to cut itself off from the national grid and run as a self-contained system. It was safer for them, but it meant abandoning Reykjavik flights. Edda had grown up believing in systems that the point was to share. But systems were made of parts, and parts could break. "We'll keep district heating," she said, "as far as the pumps will carry." Jonas nodded, relief and guilt at once. "Hospital might keep their generator," he said, "if fuel doesn't gel." Fuel gelling diesel turning waxy and cold was a detail Edda had never expected to matter in September. Now it was the kind of detail that decided who lived through the week. She went back to the lobby and found Ari sitting on the floor with his back against a vending machine, hands wrapped around a paper cup of hot water like it was holy. "How are you?" she asked. He shrugged, but his eyes followed every new arrival, counting bodies like a predator. "Is it true," he said quietly, "that it's happening everywhere?" Edda hesitated. The only reliable information came through the plant's satellite link, and even that was glitching. In the first minutes after the blackout, she'd caught a video from New York, a highway full of cars, headlights disappearing into darkness. Another from Nairobi, people under a star-stuffed sky shouting at the empty horizon. A message from Japan had been 3 words long: no sun, no dawn. "Yes," she said. Ari's jaw tightened. "So, we're not alone," Edda cut in. "Remember that." It sounded like comfort. It was also a warning. The first night, though, it was all night now, was a lesson in scarcity. Toilets stopped flushing when the pumps lost pressure. The hallway outside the visitor center bathrooms began to smell like panic. Edda and a nurse named Nadia organized a bucket system, a line of gray tubs with lids, bleach diluted in hot water, strict instructions written in Icelandic and English. "If we get sick," Nadia told them, "we freeze and die. Wash your hands." People tried to sneak into the staff kitchen. Someone pried open a vending machine. A man in a suit attempted to bribe Hrafna with a gold watch for access to the maintenance tunnels for my family. Hrafna took the watch and handed it back. "Gold doesn't burn," he said. Edda gathered the plant staff and the loudest civilians near the whiteboard. She raised her voice until it carried. "Listen," she said. "We have heat and some electricity because this plant runs on the earth, not the sun. That makes us lucky. It also makes us responsible. If we fight, we lose it. If we break equipment, we die." A few people snorted. Someone muttered, "Dramatic." Edda pointed at the dark window. "Go outside for 10 minutes, she said, "then come back and tell me how dramatic it feels." No one moved. She nodded once. "We're making rules, not because we like rules, because rules are cheaper than violence." Nadia stepped forward. "Sick people go in the conference room," she said. "Masks if you have them. We keep distance when we can." Hrafn added, "No one goes into the turbine hall without an escort. No one touches the controls. I don't care if you used to be a minister." That got a laugh, bitter but real. Edda wrote on the board. 1. One warm room per family, share walls. 2. Fill containers with water now. 3. Food inventory tomorrow at 8:00 plant time. 4. No fires inside. 5. Radios on, volume low. "Plant time?" someone asked. "We still need a schedule," Edda said. "Your body needs it, your mind needs it. We'll keep a day 24 hours. Lights bright for 12, dim for 12. She felt ridiculous, talking about circadian rhythms while the sun was missing, but she watched shoulders loosen a fraction at the idea of a pattern. Later, when most people had fallen into exhausted silence, Edda and Jonas walked the perimeter of the plant. Outside, steam curled from the vents and rose into a sky so crowded with stars it felt alive. The cold bit through Edda's jacket and made her teeth ache. "You were right to open the building," Jonas said, voice muffled by his scarf. "But how many can we take?" Edda looked out at the line of headlights winding up the road, still arriving. "As many as the heat can cover," she said, then, softer, "and as many as we can feed." Food. The word sat between them like a stone. The plant was built to turn heat into electricity, not to turn electricity into bread. The visitor center cafe had a few bags of flour and sugar. The staff pantry had instant coffee. Reykjavik had supermarkets, but supermarkets depended on trucks, and trucks depended on roads, and roads depended on people not crashing into each other in the dark. Edda had read about Antarctic stations and how they rationed. She'd read about wartime London and victory gardens. She'd read about famine and how quickly civilization's manners melted. She hadn't read about the sun disappearing. Back inside, Ari slept curled against her side on a borrowed sleeping bag. His breath made a warm spot on her shoulder. Etta lay awake listening to the plant's constant mechanical heartbeat. At some point, a murmur spread through the lobby, a rumor of dawn. Etta stood and went to the window with a dozen others. On the horizon, a faint light did glow. A thin band, pale and uncertain. People exhaled together, a sound of prayer. Then Etta realized what she was seeing. It wasn't dawn. It was Reykjavik burning. For a second, the orange flicker made the world look normal, like sunset in winter. Someone started to cry. Someone else swore, a hard word that made children flinch. Etta pressed her forehead to the glass. In her mind, she saw the map of the city, wooden houses, fuel tanks, crowded apartments. Fire in darkness was both salvation and sentence. "We need to send a team," Jonas said behind her, voice tight, "to see if—" "No," Etta said, surprising herself. "Not yet. Not tonight. The road will be worse now. People will be running." She turned away from the window. The warmth of the building felt suddenly thin, like a blanket pulled too far. In the center of the lobby, someone had found a guitar. A thin melody started, hesitant, then steadier. A song Etta recognized from childhood, about fishermen and storms. The music didn't fix anything. It didn't bring back the sun. But it kept the teeth from turning on each other for one more hour. Chapter 3. The Long Night Map. On the third morning, the water in Etta's cup had a skin of ice. That was how she knew the pipes were losing. They still had heat, but not everywhere, not evenly. Warmth collected in the center of buildings like a shy animal, and the corners turned lethal. The district heating pumps pushed hot water into Reykjavik's veins, but the farther it traveled, the more it bled out into frozen ground. In the visitor center, people built nests of blankets inside inner rooms. The lobby became a place you passed through quickly, like an outdoor space. Etta's first job was inventory. Food, water containers, medical supplies, fuel for backup generators, batteries, radios. She made lists until her hand cramped. "We have 2 days of food if everyone eats normal," Nadia said, squinting at the shelves. 3 if we cut portions. "Normal is dead," Etta said. Jonas called a meeting. Around a conference table, plant staff and a handful of civilians sat under fluorescent lights that felt too bright. Ari sat beside Etta, silent, hoodie pulled up. "We need to go into town," Jonas said. "There are warehouses, supermarkets, pharmacies. If we wait, others will take everything or it will freeze in place." "Others?" someone asked, and the room went quieter. The word meant desperate people with crowbars. It meant neighbors becoming strangers. Chaffin leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Roads are full of abandoned cars," he said. "We'll need a plow, or a tracked vehicle." Etta pictured the plant's maintenance garage. They had a snowcat used for winter access. It drank diesel. Diesel was precious. "1 run," she said. "Small team, in and out, bring what matters." Matteo spoke for the first time. He was a climate scientist from the university who'd shown up with a backpack and a laptop like those were his only organs. His eyes were ringed with sleeplessness. "What matters," he said, "is calories." The room stared at him. "Not taste," Matteo continued, "not variety, calories, oil, flour, sugar, rice, and multivitamins if we can find them. People can survive on monotonous food if it's enough energy. Without enough energy, the cold eats you from the inside." Ari shifted beside Etta. Later she realized he'd been taking notes on his phone, its battery at 14%. They picked the team, Rafna Drive, Etta for technical judgment, Nadia for medical, and 2 plant techs for lifting and lock cutting. They left after dawn, which meant after the scheduled bright hours began. If you pretended hard enough, you could believe in morning. Outside, the world was a negative of itself. The snow had come early, not gentle, but aggressive, blown sideways by wind. The landscape under starlight looked like an old photograph, black rock, white drift, no color. The snowcat's engine protested. Ravnin coaxed it like an animal. "Come on," he murmured, "not today." They crawled down toward Reykjavik. The city was darker now. The fire from the second night had either been contained or consumed. A few emergency lights blinked along main roads. Otherwise, it was as if someone had erased the human layer from the planet. Etta watched for movement and saw it in flashes. A figure hauling a sled, a group huddled around a barrel fire, a pair of headlights approaching too fast and then swerving into a snowbank. At the first supermarket, the doors had been smashed. Shelves lay on their sides like fallen teeth. The freezer aisle was a collapsed cave. "Too late," Nadia said. "Not for everything," Etta said, and they moved carefully, flashlights sweeping. They found cans hidden behind pet food. A pallet of cooking oil in the back, untouched because it wasn't immediately comforting. Bags of rice. Boxes of vitamin supplements near the pharmacy counter, knocked to the floor. Matteo had been right. Survival was calories and small chemicals you normally took for granted. Outside, the wind carried voices from the street. Coffin raised a hand. They froze. Two men appeared at the broken entrance, faces raw from cold, eyes too bright. One held a baseball bat. The other held a kitchen knife. Hey, Bat said, you got a truck? Drafon stepped forward, shoulders wide. We're taking supplies for a shelter, he said, Helishaithi. There's heat. Knife laughed. Everyone has heat, he said, until they don't. Etta felt the impulse to explain geothermal capacity, pump redundancy, thermal inertia. It was absurd. These men weren't looking for a lesson. Nadia lifted her chin. We have medicine, she said. We have a nurse, if you come with us. Bat's eyes flicked to the boxes they'd stacked. If we come, he repeated, or if we take. The knife caught the flashlight beam and flashed silver. Etta's heart pounded. She heard Ari's voice from days ago, small and sharp. Is it going to come back? She had promised him a plan, and plans depended on not dying in a supermarket aisle. Etta stepped into the light. We can trade, she said. Information, work, heat. But if you attack us, you'll be cold again in an hour. No one wins. Bat's grin showed cracked lips. You talk like someone who still thinks the world has rules. Behind him, another figure emerged from the dark. A woman, older, shoulders bent under a backpack. She looked at Etta's face, then at Nadia's, and something shifted in her expression. Stop, she said to the men, her voice cut through them like a rope. Knife frowned. Isa. Stop, Asa repeated. If they have heat, we need them alive. Bat hesitated. He glanced at Rafen, at the snowcat outside, at the supplies. Calculation, not mercy. Fine, he said. We come, but we keep our own. Etta nodded once. Everyone keeps their own, she said, and everyone works. On the ride back up, the snowcat heavy with food and extra bodies, Etta watched the city recede. Smoke rose in thin lines from somewhere, a dozen small fires, fragile as candles. Asa sat across from Etta, clutching her backpack. I was a teacher, she said, as if offering a credential. Those boys, they were my students once, before everything. Etta didn't know what to say. Before everything was a planet with a sun. Before everything was a word that already sounded like myth. Back at Helishaithi, the lobby erupted when the snowcat arrived. People surged forward, hands out, eyes hungry. Hafen barked orders. Back, make a line, back. Etta climbed down and held up a jar of multivitamins like a trophy. We brought food, she shouted. We brought medicine. We brought people. And we brought rules. There was that word again, rules. She set up rationing with the calm of someone wiring a circuit. Adults got a measured amount of rice, oil, and something canned each day. Children got slightly more. The elderly got what they could eat. No one got enough to feel full. The first week, everyone complained. The second week, they stopped complaining and started watching each other. Etta learned the geography of hunger. It made people irritable, then quiet, then cruel. It made people generous too, in small, startling bursts, a man giving his portion to his sister, a child handing a cookie to a stranger. At night dim hours, they dimmed the lights and played recorded sounds of waves because it reminded people of the ocean and not of space. Ari started teaching younger kids to draw maps of the plant, labeling warm spots and cold spots, turning survival into a game. Mateo sat at a corner table with his laptop, running models that he didn't show to anyone. One night, Etta sat beside him. How long, she asked, before the ocean freezes? Mateo didn't look up. Surface starts icing within weeks, he said. Depends on wind and currents. But the deep ocean stays warm for a long time. Years. Years, Etta echoed, and the word made her throat tighten. Mateo finally looked at her. In his eyes, she saw the same thing she felt, a cliff edge, the drop beyond it impossible to measure. We survive by moving down, he said, into earth, into water, anywhere the sun never mattered. Etta thought of the plant's wells, drilled deep into rock, tapping heat that had been there before humans invented fire. She thought of the hot water in the pipes, still running, still pushing back the cold. She thought of the crowd still arriving at the gate, drawn by the rumor of warmth like moths. Survival, she realized, was not only shelter. It was governance. It was a map of who mattered, drawn in the dark. Chapter 4, Green Light. You can't eat steam, Ari said. He said it casually, but Etta heard the accusation in it, not at her exactly, but at the universe. Steam was what she'd always trusted. Steam was steady. Steam was wealth. Now it was only heat, and heat without food was a slower kind of death. They had stretched the supermarket hall with discipline and luck. They fished in the hot water outflow channels where the water stayed liquid, pulling up stunned trout and strange fat eels. They trapped rabbits where the snow wasn't too deep. They boiled seaweed from the coast, turning it into salty, chewy strips people pretended to like. But Etta watched bodies shrink, cheeks hollowed, hands became bony. People began to move as if conserving each breath cost money. Matteo had one answer, the same answer every time. Grow calories, he said. Artificial photosynthesis, light and nutrients. Etta walked through the plant and listened to its hum. We have electricity, she said. Not much, but some. We have waste heat. We have water if we keep it moving. We have space. Space is cold, Jonah said. We insulate it, Etta replied. She pointed toward the maintenance hangar, a cavernous building that once stored vehicles and spare parts. There. The hangar became their first greenhouse. They stripped insulation from office renovations and pulled plastic sheeting from storage. They scrounged reflective foil, emergency blankets, anything that could turn heat inward. They built a smaller room inside the larger room, a box within a box. Warmth, Etta learned, was something you trapped the way you trapped fish. For light, they needed efficiency. Old fluorescent fixtures drank power. They needed LEDs, the kind used in grill operations. Reykjavik had hydroponic enthusiasts, yes, but more importantly, Reykjavik had warehouses for other crops. Hafen led another run, this one more dangerous, to a place someone whispered about with half a grin, a confiscated indoor farm the police had once raided. The irony was bitter enough to taste. They came back with crates of grow lights, nutrient salts, pumps, PVC tubing, and a book titled Hydroponics for Beginners that Ari treated like scripture. They built racks out of scrap metal. They cut holes in foam boards for net cups. They planted lettuce, spinach, herbs, fast-growing greens first, not because they were caloric, but because they kept scurvy away and gave people something living to look at. Etta watched the first seedlings push up under pink-purple light. The room smelled faintly of damp earth and plastic, a smell so out of place that it made her eyes sting. It's like a nightclub for plants, Ari whispered, and his voice held something that might have been wonder. They named the hangar the garden, which was a lie and therefore a promise. The next food was mushrooms. Nadia found a paper in her phone's saved articles about growing oyster mushrooms on coffee grounds. They had coffee grounds bags and bags from the plant's staff kitchen saved by Habit. They had cardboard. They had a warm tunnel corridor that ran between buildings. They pasteurized grounds in hot water, mixed in spawn, scavenged from a specialty shop, and packed the mixture into plastic bags with holes punched by a screwdriver. A week later, pale clusters of mushrooms erupted like quiet fireworks. People reacted as if the mushrooms were magic. We're witches now, Asa said, smiling for the first time since arriving. Etta didn't correct her. Magic was just science done by people who refused to die. The garden didn't solve hunger. Greens filled vitamins, not bellies. Mushrooms were protein light. Fish depended on weather and luck. They still needed calories, dense and steady. Starch, Matteo said. Potatoes. Wheat if we can, but potatoes are forgiving. Potatoes grew under light, yes, but they needed time. And they needed seed potatoes. And they needed a place warm enough that the water in the hydroponic pipes didn't freeze when someone forgot to insulate a corner. The solution came from the earth itself. Helishite had service tunnels that ran warm because they carried hot water and steam. Some were wide enough to walk in, lined with pipes that radiated a constant, gentle heat. They were never meant for agriculture, but Etta stood in one, watching her breath not fog, and realized it was the closest thing to summer they had. They built planters along the wall, raised beds filled with compost made from kitchen scraps and seaweed and shredded paper. The smell was awful. It was also the smell of a cycle starting again. At the end of the tunnel, they hung a strip of grow lights. Under their artificial sunrise, the first potato shoots curled upward, stubborn and green. Ari began to visit the tunnel like it was a chapel. He talked to the plants. He told them jokes. Etta heard him once say very softly, "You don't have to be afraid, we're keeping you warm." It was the first time Etta realized her son had begun to comfort himself with responsibility. That frightened her more than the cold. The garden changed the mood of the shelter, not because it provided enough food yet, but because it provided proof that life could still make more life without the sun. People started bringing Etta problems that weren't immediate survival. Can we teach the kids? Asa asked. They're forgetting how to be people. Etta thought of her own hands, always busy, always repairing. Yes, she said, teach them everything you know. Asa organized lessons in a conference room, chalk on a salvaged blackboard. Children practiced writing while their breath fogged in the colder corners. They learned multiplication and stories and, at Ari's request, basic electrical safety. Ari had become Etta's shadow, then her assistant, then something dangerously close to a colleague. One evening, Jonas pulled Etta aside. His voice was low. There's talk, he said. About what? He looked toward the lobby where people sat in clusters under dim light. About control, about who decides rations. Some are saying the plant staff are keeping more. Etta felt her stomach drop. We aren't. I know, Jonas said, but hunger makes stories, and stories make knives. Etta stared at the whiteboard, now smeared and rewritten 100 times. Warmth, waiter, order. The words looked childish and desperate. We need transparency, she said. Daily counts, open stores, rotating watchers, make it boring. Boring, Jonas repeated, as if tasting the word. Boring is safe, Etta said. If it's dull, it's predictable. Predictable is warm. That night she stood in the garden, bathed in pink light, and listened to the gentle trickle of nutrient solution through the pipes. The plant's leaves were small and perfect, each one a little machine for turning light into sugar. Without the sun, they had become the sun. Etta's phone battery finally died. She didn't mind. The real world was now the sound of water moving, the smell of compost, the careful math of calories. Outside the hangar, the stars burned on. Inside, under artificial dawn, something green insisted on existing. Chapter 5: The Committee of Warmth. The first person to call it a government was a man named Sigurður, who'd once worked in finance. This is a municipality, he announced at a meeting, gesturing grandly at the conference room full of tired faces. We have citizens, we have infrastructure, we need representation. Etta nearly laughed. The word citizen sounded absurd, like a costume you wore for a holiday. But she didn't laugh, because she saw the hunger behind Sigurður's eyes, the need for a structure he could believe in. Representation was a polite word for power. Jonas had called the meeting after a fight in the lobby over an extra blanket. The fight had ended with a broken nose and a child screaming. The child's scream had been worse than the blood. We can't keep improvising, Jonas said. We need decisions made, and we need them accepted. Accepted by who? Someone demanded. Etta looked around. There were nearly 400 people in the shelter now, not counting those still living in Reykjavik's colder buildings and coming for hot water. Helishaithi had become a magnet, and magnets attracted iron and blades. Nadia stood, arms folded. Accepted by people who want to keep living, she said. Sigurður raised his hands as if calming a stock market. Exactly, so we elect a committee. Etta felt irritation flare. Elections? She asked. In this? When half the people are newcomers and half the people are too busy not freezing? If you don't elect, Sigurður said, voice slick, you have a dictatorship. People won't tolerate that. People won't tolerate being cold, Hrafn murmured from the back. Matteo tapped his pencil against his notebook. You can call it whatever you want, he said, but the physics won't change. We have X amount of heat, we have Y amount of food. If you spend more than you have, you die. If you fight over it, you die faster. Etta watched faces shift at the bluntness. Matteo had no talent for comfort. His bluntness was, in a way, a gift. It made the choices clean. We need roles, Etta said, not titles. People responsible for water, for food, for medical, for security, for maintenance, for education. We rotate. We post decisions publicly. We keep records. Sigurður frowned. Records? So no one can say we're hiding, Etta said. In the end, they formed a committee, because humans loved the illusion that naming a thing made it controllable. They called it the Warmth Committee, which sounded ridiculous until you remembered warmth was the only currency that mattered. Etta was put in charge of maintenance and power. Nadia took health. Asa took education. Hrafn took security, though he insisted it was safety. Sigurður took logistics because he was loud and knew how to count. The first week, the committee's work was mostly boring. That was the point. They set up a schedule for showers, 1 minute per person, water barely warm to conserve. They organized work shifts, kitchen, cleaning, fishing, gardening, tunnel farming. They posted calorie counts and ration amounts where everyone could see them. People grumbled, but grumbling was better than fighting. Then the men came from the coast road. They arrived in a convoy of 3 vehicles, headlights bright, engines roaring. They stopped at the gate and didn't get out right away, as if waiting for a welcome. Hrafn met them outside with 2 plant techs carrying flashlights and 1 old flare gun. Etta watched from behind the glass, Ari beside her. The leader stepped out. He wore a camouflage jacket and a knitted hat. His beard was frosted white at the tips. He lifted his hands, palms out, theatrical. We're from Garthabar, he called. We have families. We heard you have power. We have heat, Hrafn called back. We have rules. The leader's smile was too practiced. Rules can be negotiated. Etta felt a slow anger rise. Negotiated by who? By the people with trucks and guns? She grabbed her jacket and went outside. The cold struck like a punch. She forced herself to breathe through it. In the starlight, she could see faces in the convoy, eyes reflecting like animals. I'm Etta, she said, stepping up beside Hrafn. I run maintenance here. What do you want? The leader's gaze traveled over her, assessing. I'm Christian, he said. We want shelter and heat. We can offer protection. Protection from what? Edda asked. Christian's smile thinned. From people like us, he said, and the honesty of it made Edda's throat go tight. Hrafn shifted his weight. We don't need your protection, he said. We need you not to break our gate. Christian took a step forward. You have 400 people inside, he said. We have 200. If you turn us away, we'll die. If we die, you'll have enemies. If you take us in… We don't have food for 200 more, Sigurður said, appearing behind Edda, breath steaming. He'd come running when he heard the engines. His voice trembled with fear and calculation. Christian looked at him like he was a wallet. Then you can share what you have, he said, or we can take control and make sure it's distributed fairly. Fairly. The word made Edda want to spit. She took a breath and forced her mind into numbers. 200 more mouths. Even if they worked, even if they brought supplies, the heat load alone, bodies in rooms, doors opening, toilets, illness, would strain them. But turning them away meant something worse, a war at their doorstep in freezing darkness. Edda looked at Christian's convoy, not military, just men with weapons and women with tired faces in the back seat, children bundled under blankets, eyes peering from car windows. Ari tugged her sleeve. She looked down. His face was pale in the starlight. We can't let kids freeze, he whispered. Edda closed her eyes for a second. In the dark behind her eyelids, she saw the greenhouse lights, the potato shoots, the careful math of calories. Then she opened her eyes and made a different kind of calculation. We can take some, she said, not 200, not all at once. Christian's jaw tightened. We can't split our group. You can, Edda said, or you can fight. If you fight and you damage the plant, no one gets heat, not you, not us. The Earth doesn't care who wins. Silence stretched, filled by the hiss of steam vents. Christian looked past Edda, toward the glowing windows. For a moment, Edda saw his hunger, not for food, but for safety. How many? He asked. 50, Edda said. Her voice shook, but she held it steady. 50 now. 50 in 2 days, if we can feed them. You bring every calorie you have. You bring fuel. You bring tools. Your people work. We assign sleeping space. We assign tasks. No weapons inside. Christian barked a laugh. No weapons in this world? Hrafn lifted the flare gun slightly. You can keep them locked outside, he said, or you can find another warm place. Christian stared at Hrafn, then at Edda. His eyes narrowed. You're brave, he said, like it was a flaw. I'm cold, Edda replied. After a long moment, Christian nodded. 50, he said, and turned to his convoy, barking orders. The next hours were chaos, registration, searches, arguments, tears. Some of Christian's people refused to hand over knives and were turned away. Others complied, eyes full of humiliation. Edda watched a woman hand Hrafn a small pistol with trembling fingers, then wrap her arms around her child as if to keep from falling apart. That night, the Want Committee met again. Sigurður slammed his fist on the table. We can't keep doing this, he hissed. We'll be overrun. If we don't, Asa said quietly, we become the thing we fear. Edda rubbed her eyes. She felt as if the darkness had seeped into her bones. We need expansion, she said, not of people, of capacity. Matteo looked up. How? Edda pointed at the plant schematics spread on the table. More insulation, more tunnel farming, more efficient lighting, more fishing, and, she added, thinking of the ocean's deep warmth, we need a long-term plan, underground, somewhere we can live for years if this doesn't end. Silence. The word years sat heavy. In the end, they went back to work, because there was no other option. Outside, in a world without sun, the only law was thermodynamics. Inside, the committee tried to become something more than a border around warmth. Chapter 6, The Black Disc. The first clear answer arrived as a scratchy voice on an old radio. It was day 19 by plant time. Edda knew because she had started counting days the way she counted bolts, obsessively, because numbers were something you could hold. Hrafn brought the radio into the committee room like it was a wounded animal. We've got a signal, he said. Shortwave. Someone in Akureyri, maybe farther. They crowded around the set. The speaker hissed and popped. Repeat, repeat. Any station receiving. This is observatory relay. Sun is present but occluded. Edda felt her skin prickle. Turn it up. The voice wavered, faint under atmospheric noise. Telescope confirms a dark object at solar position. Circular, sharp edge. No visible corona in direct view, but diffraction halo detected. Not cloud cover, not eclipse by moon. Global. Matteo's eyes widened. A disk, he breathed, between us and the sun. Like an eclipse, Ari said, voice small. Like an eclipse that doesn't move, Matteo replied. The radio voice continued, struggling. Estimates object at or near L1 point. approximately 1.5 million kilometers from Earth. If stable may be engineered, no natural explanation fits, communications limited, stay sheltered, conserve heat, look after each other. The message ended in static. For a moment, no one spoke. Etta stared at the radio as if it might offer more if she stared hard enough. L1. The gravitational balance point between Earth and Sun, where satellites liked to sit. Etta had once read about it in the context of weather monitoring and solar observatories, a place that belonged to science documentaries. Now it belonged to their lives. Engineered, Siegurther whispered. You mean aliens? Matteo rubbed his face. Or humans, he said. A sunshade, a weapon, a mistake, but yes, someone put something there. Why? Asa asked. The question sounded like a prayer, and Etta realized it was. If there was a why, then there was a mind. If there was a mind, maybe there was a way to bargain. Etta's mind, traitorous, ran through scenarios like a diagnostic flowchart. If the sun was blocked, not gone, then energy still existed, just not reaching them. If the object was at L1, then it was close enough to reach, in theory, with rockets. In theory was where most humans had died. We can't do anything about that, Raffen said, as if reading her thoughts. We can barely keep toilets working. Etta didn't argue. She knew he was right, but knowing didn't help. That evening, Matteo asked to use the plant's satellite uplink. The link was limited, expensive in power, and unreliable. Etta approved because sometimes information was more valuable than heat. They managed to connect for 12 minutes. In those 12 minutes, they downloaded a single image from an observatory archive, a black circle where the sun should have been, perfect and merciless, ringed by a thin halo of light like a crown seen through fog. Ari stared at the image. It's like someone covered it with their thumb, he whispered. Etta felt nauseous. The sun had always been too big to comprehend. Now it was reduced to a symbol, a dot you could hide. Matteo spoke quickly, like a man trying to outrun despair. If it's at L1, it's balanced, he said. But not perfectly. There are perturbations. It would require station keeping, thrusters, control. So it's being controlled, Siegurther said. Or it was set up with passive stability, Matteo said, but his voice lacked conviction. Etta looked at Jonas. Could we send a message? She asked. Jonas frowned. To what? To space? To whoever is controlling it, Etta said. If there's someone... The committee room went silent again. Nadia's hands clenched on the table. We can barely keep this group from fighting, she said. We can't negotiate with the sky. We don't need to negotiate, Ari said suddenly. Everyone turned to him. His cheeks were hollow, but his eyes were bright. We can show we're alive. Etta's throat tightened. How? Ari swallowed. Light, he said. We can make light, big light, like a signal. Raffen scoffed softly. To space? Ari's voice rose, defensive. Why not? If someone is watching, they'll see we're still here. Etta stared at her son and saw the child who once flashed a flashlight out his bedroom window to talk to a friend across the street. The impulse was the same, scaled up to the end of the world. If you're afraid, send a signal. Matteo's lips parted. Light can reach, he murmured, but our power. Not to L1, Etta said, not bright enough. She paused, thinking. Then, but maybe not to L1, maybe to each other. She pictured the map of Iceland, scattered towns, cold valleys, the dark ocean. In this blackness, any light was a lighthouse. A network of light could guide people to warmth and away from chaos. It wouldn't bring back the sun, but it might keep people from dying alone in the snow. They called a shelter-wide meeting. Etta stood on a chair in the lobby, voice echoing off concrete. We have information, she announced. Murmurs rose. She held up Matteo's printed image of the black disk. A wave of sound moved through the crowd, shock, anger, a kind of grief. The sun is still there, she said, and people clung to that sentence like a rope. But something is blocking it. We don't know who, we don't know why. We do know this. The only light we have right now is the light we make. She pointed toward the windows where steam glowed under starlight. This place is a beacon. We will keep it running. We will expand food. We will share what we can without collapsing. And we will put lights on the roof and on the road. Someone shouted, For what? So more people come? Etta didn't flinch. Yes, she said, so people don't die in ditches because they couldn't find the warmth. A man near the back spat on the floor. Saint, he sneered. Etta met his gaze. Engineer, she corrected. The next day, they built the beacon. It wasn't a tower of flame or a laser into the sky. It was practical. A line of LED floodlights powered directly from the plant, shielded from wind, angled down the access road. Reflectors made from metal scraps amplified it. They painted arrows on boards with phosphorescent paint scavenged from emergency kits and bolted them to posts, heat mung. At night, the road to Helishaifi became a river of pale light in a sea of black. More people came. Some were grateful, some were dangerous. But as Edda watched the line of lights cut through darkness, she felt, for the first time since the sun vanished, that they were doing more than waiting to freeze. They were writing their own sunrise. Chapter 7: The Well. On day 36, the plant coughed. It began as a vibration Edda felt to her boots, a wrongness in the turbine hall's usual song. The gauges on the control panel trembled, steam pressure dropped by a fraction, then steadied, then dropped again. Jonah stood beside her, jaw clenched. Well 14, he said, output falling. Well 14 was one of their hottest, deepest wells, a workhorse. Losing it would mean less electricity, less hot water, less everything. Edda's mind snapped into repair mode. Scaling, she said immediately, silica and minerals precipitating out of geothermal fluid, forming rock inside pipes like arteries clogging. Normally they managed it with chemistry, flushing schedules, parts replacements. Normally meant a world where you could order a part. Can we reroute? Jonas asked. We can compensate with the other wells, Edda said, but not indefinitely. The load. Her words died as she imagined the shelter without enough heat, people in thin sleeping bags, children's fingers turning blue, the warmth committee's careful rules collapsing into animal panic. We need to inspect the wellhead, she said. Outside, the wind screamed. The cold had deepened over the weeks until it felt like a living thing, searching for the smallest weakness. Edda pulled on thermal layers, then more until she moved like a stiff doll. Hrafen met her at the door, as if he'd sensed trouble. I'm comin', he said. They walked to well 14 across packed snow, headlights sweeping. The steam plume above the well was thinner than it should have been, a sickly exhale. At the wellhead, frost had formed where it never formed before. The metal was coated in rime that glittered under their flashlights. Edda knelt and touched the casing. Even through her glove, she could feel the heat underneath, struggling. Valve position? She asked. Hrafen checked the control box. It says 70% open. Edda frowned. It should have been 90. She tried to adjust it. The actuator whined but didn't move. Stuck, she said. Hrafen leaned closer. His flashlight beam revealed something Edda hadn't expected, a thin smear of something dark near the actuator housing. He touched it with a gloved finger and brought it closer. Oil, he said. Edda's mouth went dry. Oil where it shouldn't be meant sabotage, or clumsy theft, or a maintenance error so catastrophic it might as well be sabotage. She straightened, scanning the snow. Footprints, several sets overlapping, leading away into the dark. Hrafen's voice was low. Someone's been here. Edda swallowed hard. The plant was their heart. If someone was willing to cut it, they were willing to cut all of them. They returned quickly, breath burning. In the control room, Edda pulled up the surveillance feeds. The cameras outside were fogged with frost, their lenses iced over despite heaters. In the tunnel corridors, the cameras worked. At 2014 plant time, 3 figures moved through a service tunnel carrying a canister. Their faces were hidden under scarves. One of them paused and looked up at the camera as if daring it to see. Edda froze the frame and zoomed in. The eyes were familiar. Tian. The leader of the convoy from Gartha Bar. Edda's hands shook. Rage rose like heat. He's trying to take us, she said. Jonas stared at the screen. His face sagged. We took his people in, he whispered, as if the betrayal was personal. Hrafen's voice was flat. He kept his own weapons outside, he said. We believed him. Edda turned and marched to the committee room. The warrant committee assembled in minutes, dragged from sleep, faces drawn. Sigurður swore when he saw the video. We need to expel them, he said immediately. All of them, now. Tha shook her head. Children, she said. There are children. Children will die if the plant fails, Nadia snapped, and the sharpness in her voice made Edda flinch. Nadia had seen too much sickness in too little time. Edda forced herself to breathe. We need 2 actions, she said. Fix the well and contain the threat. Matteo nodded. If we lose well 14, we lose energy surplus, he said. Then the garden dies, then food production collapses, then the shelter becomes a countdown. Edda hated how clean he made it, but he was right. They split tasks. Edda and Jonas went to the maintenance shop and pulled out every chemical they had left. Anti-scaling agents, lubricants, solvents. Not enough. They'd been rationing chemistry as if it were food. We can do a manual override, Jonas said, pulling diagrams, if we bypass the actuator. If the valve isn't fused, Edda said. If the sabotage didn't damage the stem. They worked for hours, fingers numb even in gloves. Edda's breath fogged inside her face shield. She could hear the plant's deep hum faltering, like a heart skipping. Meanwhile, Hrafn gathered his safety team, half a dozen volunteers who'd proven steady under pressure. They went quietly to the rooms where Christian and his closest followers slept. Edda didn't witness what happened. She was under a metal housing, wrench in hand, when Hrafn's radio crackled once. "We have him," Hrafn said. "No shots." Edda's hands trembled so hard the wrench slipped. She clenched her jaw until it hurt. At the wellhead, they pried open the actuator housing. The smell of oil and burned insulation hit like rot. Someone had poured lubricant into the wrong port, flooding the motor, shorting it. It was crude, but it had worked. "He wanted to cripple us, then offer protection," Jonas said, voice bitter, "or take control while we panicked." Edda wanted to scream. Instead, she worked. They disengaged the motor, attached a manual lever, and braced themselves. The valve fought like a rusted giant. Edda leaned her weight into it, shoulders straining. Jonas grunted. The metal squealed. Then, slowly, it turned. Steam pressure rose by a fraction. Edda let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It steamed into the air like a prayer. Back inside, Christian sat in the conference room under harsh light, wrists zip-tied. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked more tired than dangerous, which made Edda angrier. The committee stood around him. People pressed at the doorway, whispering. The shelter had smelled the threat and gathered like wolves. Edda walked in and faced him. "Why?" she asked. Christian's mouth twitched. "Because you were going to kill us," he said. Edda laughed, short and sharp. "By feeding you?" she said. "By taking your children in?" His gaze flicked to Ari, who stood behind Edda, pale and rigid. "Not you," Christian said. "Not on purpose, but physics will, hunger will. You have power, we don't. People like you will always choose your own first." Edda felt something cold and deep inside her, not fear, recognition. He had been wrong about her, but not wrong about humans. "So you tried to break the only thing keeping anyone alive," she said. Christian lifted his chin. "I tried to ensure my people survived," he said. "That's what you're doing too." Edda stared at him and understood, with terrible clarity, that survival did not automatically make you good. It made you focused. Hrafn stepped forward. "We can put him outside," he said quietly. "No heat, no shelter. Let the cold decide." The crowd murmured approval. Cold justice. Simple. As his voice cut through, "And his people?" she asked. "The ones who didn't sabotage? The children?" Sigurðarnöf tightened. "If we keep them, they'll be loyal to him," he said. "If we expel them, they'll die. Either way, we lose." Edda looked at Ari. He met her eyes, begging without words. Edda took a breath. She thought of the valve turning, the plant's heart catching again. She thought of rules being cheaper than violence. "We hold a trial," she said. The word trial sounded absurd in the dark, but it gave shape to fury. It gave time. They documented evidence. They questioned witnesses. Christian refused to confess. His followers watched with blank faces, fear and loyalty tangled. In the end, the committee made a decision that satisfied no one. Christian was exiled, not into the cold alone, but to a smaller shelter down the slope, a maintenance outbuilding that still received some heat, but no access to controls, no power beyond a single lamp. 2 volunteers stayed there with him, rotating shifts, not guards exactly, but boundaries. His group remained, but dispersed into different work teams, separated from each other. Their weapons stayed locked outside. Their resentment stayed inside. Edda knew she had planted a seed of future conflict. But she had also kept the plant alive. That night, Edda stood at the wellhead and watched steam rise into a sky full of indifferent stars. Her hands were raw, her shoulders ached, her breath came in shallow, careful pulls. Survival, she realized, wasn't one heroic moment. It was a valve you forced open in the dark while someone tried to close it. Chapter 8, Light We Keep. Winter arrived without ceremony. In Iceland, winter used to be a season of slanting light and long nights. Now it was a continuation of the same impossible night, only colder, only heavier. Snow buried cars where they'd been abandoned. Drift piled against doors until doors vanished. The world simplified into 2 categories, what was heated and what was dead. By day 90, Edda had stopped telling most people the number because it made them blink like animals. The shelter had changed shape. It was no longer a crowded lobby and a handful of sleeping rooms. It was a small city of warmth built inside industrial bones. They had expanded the garden into 2 hangars, doubling racks, improving insulation, reducing wasted heat with ducted airflow. Ari and Matteo had designed a lighting schedule that mimicked summer, brighter for plants during day hours, dimmer and more red during night so people could sleep. They grew potatoes now, real sacks of them, knobbly and dirty and precious. They grew dwarf wheat in trays, not enough for bread yet, but enough to make the shelter smell, sometimes faintly like grain. They grew algae in shallow tanks for protein. It tasted like pond scum. People ate it anyway. They built a composting system that no one wanted to talk about. They built a water loop that kept pipes from freezing by constant motion and insulation. They dug deeper into the warm tunnels, carving out sleeping nooks in the heat shadow of pipes like animals burrowing near a fire. They got better at boredom. Boredom, Etta learned, was a sign of stability. It meant people were no longer in constant crisis. It meant they had enough food to complain about taste, enough warmth to complain about crowding. It also meant grief had room to move. People spoke in hushed voices about those who hadn't made it to the beacon, about parents lost on roads, about friends who had stayed in Reykjavik too long, waiting for rescue that never came. Some nights Etta dreamed of sunlight so bright it hurt, and woke with tears freezing on her cheeks. On day 1001, a baby was born. The mother was one of Christian's people, a young woman named Lilia who had been silent for weeks, moving through tasks like a ghost. Nadia delivered the baby in a warmed conference room lined with clean towels and a string of dim fairy lights someone had saved for Christmas. When Nadia carried the child into the lobby, wrapped in a blanket, a hush fell over the shelter like snow. The baby's skin was pink from heat, fists clenched, mouth searching. A sound came out of him, small, furious, alive. People laughed and cried at once. Etta felt her throat close. Ari stood beside her, eyes wide, and Etta saw the way his shoulders lifted, as if something heavy had shifted off him for a moment. "What's his name?" someone asked. Lilja's voice was hoarse but clear. "Sol," she said. "Son." It should have been a joke. It wasn't. That night, after the shelter settled back into its routines, Etta climbed the stairs to the roof. The wind cut through her clothes like knives. She carried a thermos of hot water and a small portable radio, mostly out of habit. The beacon lights threw pale pools onto the snow below, making the access road look like a path through a dream. Beyond their reach, the world was a black plain under a sky crowded with stars. Etta looked toward the southern horizon, where the sun should have been hidden behind the disk. She tried to imagine the black circle hanging in space, perfectly aligned, held there by some invisible hand. Her radio crackled. Static, then a voice. Helishaithi Station, if you can receive. This is Akureyri Relay. Update, diffraction halo brightening, slight asymmetry, possible movement of occluding object. Repeat, possible drift. Etta's heart stuttered. She turned the dial, trying to hold the signal. The voice faded, returned, then broke apart, but the message lodged in her like a spark. Possible movement. She stared at the horizon. At first there was nothing but black. Then, so faint she thought it was her eyes, she saw it, a thin line, not light exactly, but a lessening of dark, as if someone had smudged charcoal with a thumb. It could have been clouds. It could have been her brain desperate for meaning. But it was there. Behind her, the shelter's warm breath rose through vents. Inside, people slept in tunnels and rooms and makeshift dorms. Inside, LED lights glowed over potato leaves. Inside, a baby named Sun breathed. Etta sipped hot water. It tasted like metal and life. Footsteps crunched on snow. Ari appeared, bundled and shivering. "I figured you'd be up here," he said. Etta didn't scold him. She shifted so he could stand beside her. Together they looked out at the horizon. "Is that?" Ari asked. "Maybe," Etta said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Even if it comes back, it won't fix everything." Etta looked at him, surprised by the maturity in his tone. "No," she agreed. Ari's breath steamed. "But we made it," he said. "We made all this." Etta followed his gaze back to the beacon lights, to the glowing windows, to the plume of steam rising like a white tree into the black sky. "We did," she said. Below them, a string of headlights appeared on the road, wobbling, slow. Someone new was coming, drawn by the light they kept. Etta felt the familiar tug of responsibility, the endless math of heat and mouths. She also felt something else, small and stubborn as a potato shoot, hope. She took Ari's hand. His fingers were cold. Her fingers were rough, their palms bit anyway. "If the sun never returns," Ari said, voice barely above the wind, "we can still live?" Etta looked at the shelter below, at the warmed tunnels, at the garden's pink glow bleeding faintly through cracks, at the baby named Sol asleep under artificial lights. She thought of the Earth's deep heat, endless and patient. She thought of water moving in pipes, refusing to freeze because it kept going. "Yes," she said, "we can." On the horizon, the faint smudge held. It did not become dawn, not yet. But it was enough to remind her darkness could be resisted. not with miracles. With valves and rules and shared blankets. With green leaves under pink light. With a road lit so no one had to die alone in a ditch. With the light they kept,